joining us for today's PENTalk. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them through the question box. We'll answer as many questions at the end as time allows, but if we don't get to your question today, we will follow up with you afterwards. Tomorrow, you will receive an email with a link to replay today's broadcast. Let's get started. Hosting today is Kate Blake, Learning and Development Manager at Pentegra. Kate has been with us since the beginning of her career, where she started in the retirement benefits field. Today, Kate is going to provide an overview to help make sure your clients' retirement plans are fully prepared for the year ahead and beyond. Kate, I will now hand things over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lizzie, for that intro, and thank you, everybody, for taking the time out of your schedules to join me today for this overview. And over the next, let's say, 30 minutes or so, I think I'd like to divide this into three primary categories. We'll talk about some legislative updates, including developments in the PEP landscape, changes regarding Roth limits and catch-up contributions. 2026 limits have finally come out, so we'll take a look at those. Then we'll switch gears and delve into some year-end best practices. So that's going to include notices, who's doing them, when do they go out, 1099-Rs, same questions. What's going on with annual census data collection, and how can you set your clients up for success to get clean census data in good order onto our portal? And then we'll close out with possibly my favorite topic on this whole agenda, which is a look at plan design trends for 2026. What's going on out there in the landscape, and how is it being influenced by these other subjects, which we're going to be discussing today? So let's go ahead and dive in with a look at some legislative updates. PEPs. PEPs were created now a couple of years ago, pooled employer plans, and there's been a little bit of guidance out there. We do have, some best practices in place. However, earlier this year, there was a document released out on the Federal Register website, linked it right here. It's great to check out if you haven't looked at it yet, called Pooled Employer Plans, Big Plans for Small Businesses. And the intent of this document I've kind of got here, it's trying to give a general description of the ERISA framework, so what regs are applicable to pooled employer plans. And it's taken a look at the PEP marketplace today, so what sort of services are being provided. And looking at the document, it seems to have an eye heavily towards investment-related services. There's also a little bit of interpretive guidance to help employers understand their responsibilities as fiduciaries when joining and working with PEPs, tips to assist small employers in selecting PEPs. And then it also was asking for information about prevailing net practices. So there was a request for comments available where industry providers could provide information to the government about what they're doing and what they would like to see. The purpose of this all being more guidance, which will likely be forthcoming in the future. I always like, when we do these types of reviews, to help you all find ways as practitioners in the space to make this actionable for your clients. So to that end, like I mentioned, I do encourage you to click this link here, which is a link to the document. And about midway through the document, there's a section called Tips for Small Employers. That's what this bullet point is talking about here. And I love this document because you can take that section and you can turn it into a checklist. If you work with any employers in the PEP space, you can then bring that checklist to your next annual plan review or meeting with that client. It's a great way to introduce the topic of this Federal Register document and its contents. And some of the things that are provided in it in terms of tips are making sure that your clients know what a PEP has to offer them and their employees. Understand the type of PEP that they're in. So for example, who is the 338 and what assessment criteria was used to review and appoint them, along with about 8 different other criteria that, again, you can turn into a very nice streamlined little checklist to take to your meetings. And I like this because many of us can go out into the space, if we work with PEPs or want to work with PEPs, and pitch them to our clients and say, oh, they're great. But we really need to understand how they work, and having these little sort of elevator pitches, so to speak, about what the PEP has to offer, how it works, how appointment practices work, how vendors are monitored, how fees work, and things of that nature, as outlined in this document, can really help you give your clients a better understanding of whether or not PEPs are right for them. So more forthcoming, but that document is definitely key in helping employers connect the dots, at least for now. We've also got some changes coming to Roth. One of them is a voluntary change, which is what we're looking at here, and this is an increased Roth contribution limit between ages 60 and 63. So this is a voluntary provision associated with Secure 2.0, which passed a couple of years ago. It's available to 401k, 403b, and 457 governmental plans. And what this is an increased limit equal to 150%, as you can see here, of the current catch-up limit, which we'll look at in just a moment for 2026. Now, as we mentioned, this is voluntary. So employers are not required to adopt these provisions, and the little minor wrinkle in the fabric here is that because this is associated with Secure 2.0, the amendment deadline is not, as you can see, until 12/31/2026. So the key, if you have any clients who would like to adopt this, is to ensure that they're in operational compliance. What does that typically look like? Well, that you're applying the provision on a uniform and non-discriminatory basis. How do you do that? Well, one way that I love to facilitate that I think also builds goodwill among clients and employees, is via employee education. You can make meetings available to everybody, make a little one-pager to go with it, ensure that it's distributed, and that everybody is aware of this provision, should your clients choose to adopt it. Then we have Roth catch-up contributions for high earners. Now this is non-voluntary. This is required, and employers must be prepared to be in compliance with these new regulations associated, again, with Secure 2.0, effective 1/1/26. Same story, though, with the amendments, even though the amendments are not necessarily required until the end of the year. Now, I want to talk about this one because there is a little bit of nuance associated with this. There's a new definition at play. Most of us are familiar with the concept of HCEs, highly compensated employees, for purposes of plan testing. This new provision introduces this term here in the first bullet point, highly paid individuals, or I've heard it referred to fondly in the industry as an HPI. Know that there is a difference, and that the folks with this new rule, the HPIs, they have their own limit. So you will need to make sure that clients are able to identify who these HPIs are beginning next year, because if they want to make catch-up contributions, as you can see here, they're going to be required to do it on a Roth basis. And there's a little nuance in the rest of this bullet point too. There's somewhat, I suppose, of a way around offering this, which is, if you don't have a catch-up or available in the plan, then it kind of becomes a moot point. So this is for those plans that have catch-up provided for in the plan document. This will apply next year. So what is an HPI? There's a separate limit. Like I said, this last bullet point here, this is the key piece. They're determined based on FICA wages. The government was shut down for an extended period of time. When I put this presentation together, we only had the 2025 limit, which was $145,000. since the government has reopened and we've gotten the limits, we've found out the 26 limit, which is $150,000. That said, when I was updating the presentation, I chose to leave this 25 limit in here because I'm trying to communicate the fact that this is going to operate in all likelihood like our other limits do, where they're indexed annually. So in 26, it's going to be $150,000 FICA wages, and per the final regs, that's going to be W-2 box 3. There's a little bit of a potential wrinkle for the future, which is that box is limited to the OASDI max, but that's currently higher than the HPI limit, so it's not an issue for 2026, but something to just keep in mind in the future. I think most record keepers at this point are very aware of these provisions and have plans to implement them. But, if you have maybe a relationship with a couple of primary record keepers, maybe it's worth reaching out to them and just saying, hey, you ready to go for 26? Is there anything that I can do to help, facilitate this for my clients, to help them figure out who these HPIs are? I wanted to put these catch-up and Roth fast facts just to help place this in a greater context in terms of the industry and what employers are doing. Because I said before, there was kind of like a little way around those new catch-up for highly paid individuals rule, which is if you just don't have the catch-up provision at all. So according to the Plan Sponsor 2025 benchmarking survey, 55.4% of plans offer catch-up contributions, which was a fact that kind of shocked me at first because I thought to myself, wow, like half of employers are not offering this. But then when I drilled down a little bit more into the details, I realized that it was very segmented by asset level. So you can see here in this sub-bullet, 93.8% of plans with over 500 million in assets offer catch-up, compared to only 36.2% of plans with less than 1 million in assets. Although not knowing the demographics, but making an educated guess, I suppose there is perhaps an argument to be made that maybe those small plans with less than 1 million in assets, maybe some of them are small businesses with maybe lower salaries, maybe they're not maxing the plan anyway, therefore catch-up is already a moot point. But I thought that those statistics were interesting just in the broader scheme of the regulatory changes. And then Roth, just in general, I thought this was interesting too. Roth has been increasing in popularity since it became available in 401k plans with, as of this year, almost 80% of plans offering it as a source. So that is almost unilaterally offered across all asset levels at this point. Here's a look at the 2026 annual contribution limits. So you can see our elective deferral limit did go up by $1,000 here. We have an increase in our basic catch-up limit, though just see the asterisk here, that's indicating what we spoke about before, that super catch-up for ages 60 to 63 if elected. No changes to our HCE dollar limit, and a couple of our other limits here did modestly rise. Now let's switch gears and turn our attention to some year-end best practices. And like we said, there's really 3 components of this I want to look at. The first being notices. Notices are important. I know they're annoying, but they are required for compliance. Most of our clients are calendar year plans, so in that scenario, typically the notice packages are distributed generally at the end of November. There's certain parameters around specifically when those notices are required to go out, when prior to the end of the plan year. Depending on our services, we may either send notices directly to participants, or we may send the notices to the employer to forward to participants. This is another way, it's like a help me, help you kind of thing. Sometimes when I used to have a direct book of business that I would work with, I would send clients a little note a little happygram around this time in November, just saying, hey, reminder, notices are coming up. You are, it's your responsibility to distribute them, or your vendor is going to distribute them for you. Just a reminder, happy Thanksgiving. And I always found that little email, it took 30 seconds to write, but it built so much goodwill with clients. And if you're not sure, usually that information pertaining to who distributes notices is detailed in the service agreement. And then notice packages are going to vary. So you may have very different notice packages for different employers in your book of business, depending on the specific provisions that they've elected in their particular plan. But generally, the notice package could include things like automatic enrollment notifications, UDIA notice, safe harbor notice if applicable, 404C notice, and a fee disclosure notice. And yes, we all know, this is probably great bedtime reading if you can't sleep at night, but I think it's important to let clients know the purpose of these notices. You can point to a couple of specific things. For example, a safe harbor notice will describe what kind of contributions they're going to get. In most cases, a fee disclosure notice might describe how much they're paying for the plan. So this is important stuff. And sometimes too, in addition to sending a little happygram to clients, it helps to break down what's in the notice package, just kind of in plain English for them. And that's pretty easy to do too. If anybody, needs help with it, of course, your PENTalk representatives are available to help you decode those notice packages. The other piece of this, thinking of year-end 1099-Rs. So this happens into the new year, so on the other side of things when we're into 2026, but the 1099-Rs, of course, are the tax documents representing the distributions made during 2025. So are going to be critical for folks' tax filings in 26. They're sent to anybody who's taken a distribution. So even if a participant rolls over their funds, they will still receive a 1099-R. And then the third component, when I'm thinking of year-end readiness, has to do with annual census data submission. Many, I would say probably the majority of our clients, we ask for an annual census data submission. And the window for this submission period typically begins in early 2026, like first week or so in January. We need this information. It includes things like compensation, hours, demographic information for plan participants, because this goes ultimately into things like testing and all of the, important administrative work that we do behind the scenes to ensure that the plan remains in compliance. So it's important that clients get us this data, but we want to pave that road for them. We want to make it as easy as possible. So I just wanted to give you all, as being in that role, somewhat of a liaison of a sense of what's coming down the pipeline. So for most clients, this process is going to happen on the client portal. So if a client is responsible for census data submission, they should have client portal access, and they will receive an email blast when the request has been loaded. Of course, they can reach out to their PENTalk representative if they have any questions or need assistance during the process. But again, just small, low-hanging fruit, easy wins that I can recommend to everybody on this call today. If you have clients who fall into this boat, and this is generally your, DC style plans, 401k, 403b. We also use this process for certain DB plans. So if you have clients who fall into that bucket, just make sure that they can log into the client portal. We don't need to make a huge production out of it, but it could be just as part of perhaps a proactive reach out when you're calling them or sending them that happygram, telling them about their year-end tasks. Just like I did in this presentation, you can make a little bulleted list: notices, 1099-R, census data. And under census data, just put a little sub-bullet. Make sure you can log into the portal. And this is what it's going to look like. So I did want to put a screenshot because I don't want anybody to be surprised or not know what's out there. If you advise anybody to do that, just pop onto the website, make sure you can log in so you're ready. They're probably not going to see that much out there. And that's why I wanted to show you this, because it's November. We're still in notice mode. We haven't launched this yet. So this is just looking ahead to the future. But if they can log in successfully, this is what a successful landing page of active tasks looks like. For most of our clients, they have already months ago submitted their census data in conjunction with this process, so it's probably going to say no records found. But here on the next page is what it's going to look like when it is launched. And I know this is a little small, but we are recording this presentation, so you can certainly refer back to this just to make sure you can see what clients will see, because this just helps everything go more smoothly and helps us all be able to answer client questions. What's going to happen when the process is launched right over here, it turns from the no records found to a list of yellow things with an exclamation point. And what we're asking is for clients to review these sections that are going to be filled with pre-populated data as applicable from our records, and just ensure that it is still up to date. Some of it's going to be a breeze. For example, general is, what's your business name? If your business name has not changed, click, submit, move on, done. Some of it is going to require an upload or an update to employee information. That's what I was saying on the previous slide, and that's the census section. This is where we're going to ask clients to either update in a table format or supply us with a spreadsheet with that comp, hours, hire, rehire, all that, good census data that we need for testing. Now, the key here when you're talking to clients about this is they just want these yellows to turn green. It's just color coded. We tried to make it, again, as easy as possible. So just advise clients, make sure you can log onto the site. You'll get an email blast probably beginning of year when this is launched. And when it is launched, you'll log in, you'll see these yellow prompts, and you will know you are successfully done when they have all turned to green. And that's it. After that, the ball is in our court with testing and everything that is associated with that. All right, with the last couple of minutes, let's turn our attention to some plan design trends for 2026. Like I said, I think this is kind of the fun part. I mean, the regulatory stuff and the census data submission and all that stuff is important for compliance. But in my view, there is an art as well as a science to plan design. And I think that understanding the headwinds, tailwinds, and trends in the industry can help you become better practitioners in the space for your clients. So the next couple of slides just kind of round out our presentation with just what we've been seeing out there. Retirement plan mandates. As of October 2025, there are now 20 states, so almost half, that have enacted new programs for private sector workers regarding retirement plans. 16 of the 20 state programs and 2 others are fully open to all eligible employers and workers. Now, I'm calling in here from New York. We are one on the list. Now, when we first started seeing mandates some years ago, I think there was a little bit of a worry, what's this really going to look like? But I think that the way that these are designed, and I'm just thinking particularly of New York, is pretty streamlined and unobtrusive. The New York mandates a Roth IRA-based plan, no required employer contributions, and it just applies to employers who've been in business for at least 12 months with 5 or more employees. So again, employers don't have to make contributions if they don't want to, and there are some exemptions. So it is at least somewhat employer-friendly in that regard. And, a lot of states are looking at what's out there, whether they're introducing legislation to establish new programs, amending existing programs, or forming study groups to explore their options. What does this matter to us as practitioners in the space? Well, consulting opportunities for those study groups, new plan startup opportunities. It's opening up a whole new space of the industry that previously didn't necessarily sponsor these plans. Most common plan design changes over the last 12 months. I thought this was interesting too. Number 1 is an increase of match. Number 7, though, is a decrease in match. So we're seeing a lot of match movement, and you can check it out here in item 3 too, where we began offering a match. So we can see a lot of employer contribution changes, a lot of automatic feature changes. Check out item 2, 4, 5. Those are all associated, I imagine, with Secure 2.0 primarily. There's movement in Roth changes, adding Roth source. We looked at those statistics earlier down here. So I don't think there's too many surprises here. I think this is pretty in line with what we're seeing in terms of regulatory environment. Just a couple stats about those provisions. Employer contributions, we saw a lot of changes there. 63% of plans as of 2025 offer a match, and 49.5% offer a profit sharing that exceeds 100 because some plans offer both. The most common range for non-elective contributions is between 3 and 5%. The most common match is on 4%, with 25% of those respondents just using a simple dollar for dollar formula, and another 12% using some type of stretch match, like a 50 cents on the dollar. Philosophically, I think there's arguments to be made for both. So I think that spread is kind of interesting. And then in terms of automatic features, about half of our plans use auto enrollment. And when I say our plans, I mean plans in the space. You can see, though, that this too is bifurcated by plan size. Re-enrollment, we saw a lot of news headlines on that for a few years, but it still has not really gained a ton of traction in the space, with less than 10% of plans trying this approach in the last few years. And then in terms of default rates, the most common default deferral rate is 2 to 3%, followed by a 5 to 6% deferral. And if there's an auto escalation, it typically is 1%, and about 25% of plans tie that in. And I think that ties in with those default auto enrollment features that we see in conjunction with Secure 2.0. So that leads me to believe that people who are subject to the regs are just probably following the regs as written and not necessarily getting too creative with it. And if they are, it's typically like maybe a 6% initial deferral instead of a 3%. So where do we go from here? Like I said, I always like to make this as actionable as possible. So, if I was in your shoes with a client caseload getting ready for the end of the year, I would make them the little happygram with maybe 3, or if you have any more items of interest for year end, like we said, the 1099, the notices, and the census data. Remind them of the deadlines, make sure they can access the portal for the data, and then just keep those plan design trends in mind as you're moving forward with annual plan reviews. I always like to do those in the springtime on the heels of things like the census data submission and testing. I find that's a great time when people's attention is on the plan and they're not yet necessarily out for, summer vacations and things like that. So with that, I'll stop talking about summer vacations because I think we're heading into Thanksgiving next week. And Lizzie, before I turn it back to you, I'll just wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving next week. Thank you all so much again for taking the time during the season to join us. I hope you all enjoy time with your families. And Lizzie, I'll pass it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kate, and everyone who attended today's webinar. If you did submit a question that we did not get to today, we will follow up with you separately. And that said, everyone have a great rest of your day.